So next up, we have OG versus Team Spirit. For me, I think this game is really interesting because I think this is the first time that Spirit reveals one of their big answers to the Tiny Carry. And a very cool series for other reasons too, where I think we have a little bit of personality shining through for Spirit that kind of shows you where their heads are at. So prior to playing OG, Team Spirit absolutely demolished Fnatic. It's a series that doesn't really look close, so there isn't really much interesting things to talk about. Spirit come drop into the lower bracket. They don't seem to be phased by the fact that they lost to IG. They come into the series playing with a lot of confidence, and yeah, they pretty much smash Fnatic. And their next round opponents is legendary 2-time winning OG. So let's dive right into that series. So in this series, we see Collapse getting like the respect that he kind of deserves. The Mars is banned out, the Tide is banned out, and this leaves Spirit with an interesting decision where do we give away the Tiny or the Wisp? And they decide, let's give away the Tiny. We've now played against it enough times to have figured out an answer. And they've played it themselves enough times to figure out what you don't want to play against. And this is an answer that they're going to kind of commit to for most of this tournament. And it's the Magnus combined with the Winter Wyvern. So the idea here is that if you think about the game 1 against IG's biggest problem was they were not able to end the game because the Mars could put the Leshrac out of position. He could spear the Leshrac into his base, and then his entire team could collapse on him. And they can accomplish the same thing here with the Magnus. The Mars is out, but they can do the same thing with the Magnus. When the Tiny runs up to hit their base, you just skewer him really far in, and then he's isolated from his team, and he's no longer the same hero. And suddenly, a hero like Winter Wyvern generally struggles with the fact that it's hard to position yourself correctly, because you have to go into the fight in order to use your spells. But when Magnus is pulling heroes to you, now you're suddenly in position while you're playing defensively. So it's a very, very smart combo, and now the Wyvern can utilize his Arctic Burn to really deal damage to the Tiny too. So they've set themselves up for a very, very interesting start where they've already answered the Tiny carry. And OG here in this position, they're being pretty stubborn, and we're once again going to see this TV ban when they're picking this Tiny. So this is, I think, the second or third time now that this has happened. And it will be important to remember for later. We also learned from the Secret series that Tiny is fairly vulnerable to stun. And from the IG series, we learned about this Kaka Lion was very annoying. The instant stun threat was something that really had to deal with. So here they're going to value it themselves. And another hero that we constantly saw banned out when Tiny was picked was Faceless Void, because of the ability to chrono and then just keep bashing him with the mixed damage of magic and physical. And he has the ability to regain most of his life against Tiny, right? So unless Tiny can kill you on a combo, you're going to get most of your HP back. So also a very good hero against Darkseer, for those of you at home that are looking for answers against Darkseer. The illusion from Wall of Replica basically does nothing. Dawnbreaker was also played in the series earlier by Thompson to absolutely demolish a Void Spirit mid, I believe, or an Ember Spirit. So they're being careful of letting it through, making sure it's planned out here. There's the Void Spirit, followed up by the Faceless Void, and there's both drafts. So Sumail's playing the Tiny, they have the Seb, Darkseer to empower him, kind of charge him around, and everybody knows how OG plays at this point. It's going to be these 4 heroes that are running around creating chaos, while the Tiny is going to farm up and then come in and wrap the game up for them. That's like the idea here, right? So for Spirit, it's all about defense now. We're no longer playing the fast draft, we're playing the slow draft. We're gone back to, we're going to try to slow your game down and make sure that we are playing our game. And it's going to be a lot of responding to what OG does. So quite crucially in this series, or in this game, Collapse is off to a pretty mediocre start. Even though they have a lot of kills, you can tell this Tiny is very strong, and the Darkseer is very strong too. So is Thompson. So overall, the gold distribution on OG side, it's working out the way they want for them to play aggressive. They're able to set up this very aggressive stance on the map. They've taken down the most important towers, and Spirit's feeling the pressure here. And I think this is one of the positions that when Spirit was put in, they were one of the best teams out there at making sure that they get resources out of the map. And I think for me, this is one of the series where Toronto Tokyo played very, very well. And he was able to constantly shove out creep waves and make OG chase him around the map. So normally when you see Ember Spirit, you think of him as this hero that's constantly fighting, and he's ganking, and he's pressuring, and he's doing a lot of these things. But what Toronto Tokyo does in this game accomplishes the same thing but in a different way. Since his team can't fight with him, he's just constantly shoving waves so that the enemy team is forced to respond to him in that he's just on the lanes all the time, and they're forced to come, like, react. They have to do something about it, or he's going to have a lot of freedom. And when he does this, he gets a lot of information about what OG is up to and what they're doing, and that buys space for the rest of his team to make moves and to find a space on the map that they need. And it's something that he does constantly here, and you're going to see it. The Fire Remnant, and just run out the wave. It's a very simple Ember play, but he does it very, very well, and he dodges these ganks, crucially, to buy time for the rest of his draft to come online. So you notice Team Spirit also, they're just kind of waiting for OG to run into them. They're playing very safe. They're kind of holding their own side. They're not managing to do as well in the Vision game as they're used to doing, but they're playing very safe, and they're making sure to respond to the moves that OG does. They know that when OG brings one, there's going to be a lot more heroes behind him, so they're TPing in early here on Collapse to make sure he's in position. And that kind of forces OG to ditch and do other things instead. Both these drafts have one very crucial thing in common, and it's that they're both waiting for this 20-minute timing. For Magnus, it's the Horn Toss shard that is really, really good, and it allows you to basically guarantee that your skewer is going to go the way you want it to. And it works sort of like an extra cast range on your skewer. So prior to this 20-minute mark, there isn't really much that needs to be accomplished. And this is a very crucial chronosphere that's used, because even though Seb dies, right before the 20-minute mark, when the Tiny gets his shard that allows him to suddenly have unlimited tree spells, there is no chrono, right? So once Tiny sends out the shard here on the courier, this gives them a lot of freedom, and they are able to get this Roche. So I think this is a little bit of a mistake from Team Spirit, or they kind of get baited into it by Seb, who is playing over aggressively on purpose to get this chrono to be used. And here we see Roshan from OG. It's fairly uncontested because there just isn't a chrono. Spirit can't just run into the Roche pit and take a fight. So even though they probably know that this Roche is happening, they just don't feel comfortable fighting without their chronosphere. So right now you're really, really on the back foot if you're Team Spirit. And this is a position I think you didn't really want to be in, but you have the draft that can make the comeback. And this is very crucial, right? Compared to the IG series, you now have a draft that can fight back. And they decide to hold their wards here, and Seb comes in. They're playing together as 5 on top of their vision, and they're able to take a decent fight here. And the idea here for Spirit is just they want to delay the game. They want to survive, right? And we touched on this earlier, but for example, when you win this kind of fight now, where there are heroes dead from both sides, so what happens is there's a lot of creep waves now that need to be farmed, right? There's nobody in the mid lane, there's nobody in the bottom lane. All of these lanes can now be farmed. So Yatoro can go to the bottom lane and just shove this out. He knows that he has freedom on the map. All he needs to be careful of is reading a potential move. But since he sees both Thompson and Sumail hitting the top tower, he knows that he's very safe. And the second they start fogging, well, he does the same thing. He matches them. So here comes the curse onto the Tiny. They're again just aiming to delay the game, even though maybe they are not going to be able to kill their heroes here. They just want to make sure that they can't play their game. Sumail's not allowed to do what he wants to do. And it is an Aegis Tiny, so like, of course, like Mpashka's going to give his life away. But crucially throughout all this, they're outputting damage, they're slowing down their game. They're not allowed to just march up high ground with a full HP Tiny with Aegis. So taking out this Aegis here becomes like, now suddenly if the Magnus skewers him, he's very scared. Sumail doesn't want to play the game anymore on the enemy's high ground. And here we see a very crucial aspect of the Faceless Void coming into play, right? Where if the Tiny can't kill him in the combo, Time Walk will heal him back up, and this makes it a fairly decent matchup for the Void if he's able to keep even on resources, which he's managed to do. So yeah, I mean, this is a trade team fight. 4 heroes die for OG, 3 heroes die for Team Spirit. So it's not, the fight itself doesn't necessarily change the game too much, but the most crucial aspect of it is that they're delaying the timing. They're not allowing this Tiny to come up the high ground with Aegis. OG now have to give them another 5 to 6 minutes while they wait for Aegis to spawn in order to go for the high ground. Otherwise, the Tiny's under the threat of getting Magnus skewered in and dying. Yeah, so here we see again, when Spirit don't have cooldowns, they are going to play very grouped up. And this is a really smart smoke that OG makes. But Spirit again, you know, every time they give something away, they get something in return. They always make sure to delay the game. They try to like slow it down. And Toronto Tokyo is going to start running at these creep waves to try to slow down OG's game plan. So if you notice, there's just like nothing that OG does here is for free. The no-tail's gonna go down to hit the bottom tower. Even though Ember Spirit feels like, alright, well, there might be 4 heroes here, or like there might be a lot of heroes coming here. He's gonna run in and apply the pressure to force the heroes to come back. And if OG doesn't respond the right way, then well, he's just gonna keep pressuring. And he's gonna keep pressuring, and this buys time for Yatoro to run out the top lane, right? So Toronto Tokyo, with his gameplay here, he's occupying a lot of space. And it's forcing OG to react. You see, like, Sumail now has to run towards bottom. Saksa also has to run towards bottom. They need to stop this guy from doing what he wants. So even if he ends up dying here, which he ideally doesn't, and he doesn't in this case, it's still a very good play. And it's constantly forcing Sumail to run into areas that he doesn't want to run to. He wish he was hitting this mid-tier 2 tower right now. But now he has to come and hit this tower that he was wishing no-tail would just take for him. And now suddenly the Chrono's back up. And Team Spirit has the ability to fight back. So what do? They understand we might not win a fight clean, but we can get a couple of kills and hopefully trade. And there's a huge initiation from Saksa. Catches both Mira and Collapse. But again, it's trades, right? As long as Spirit are trading, they're very, very happy. They're okay burning some cooldowns to get through these fights, just to delay the game, just to make sure that Sumail's not walking up and hitting their high ground before they're ready for it. We noticed this as well, a trend from earlier. When Spirit falls behind, what do? Well, they run in and take over the enemy triangle. So here's the ward. We saw a very similar ward placed on this cliff earlier. And they notice there's no heroes holding the ramp. And that gives them the freedom to comfortably walk in Yatoro can farm. And during all of this, Toronto Tokyo is just constantly pushing out the waves. The waves that reach their base, Toronto Tokyo is on the case. He's just making sure that they get pushed out. And OG now, like, they probably watched the replays from earlier. I think they understand that Team Spirit are in the triangle, and they understand that they're playing on their own wards. So they don't really want to run over there. And they do this pretty smart play here where they go to their own wards instead. And they try to hold their side. But then Sumail's BKB gets popped. And right now, this fight is already kind of won if you're Team Spirit. You're happy if nothing more happens in this team fight and both teams go back to their base. You know that you've bought time. You know that there's more time that this Tiny is not locking up our high ground. So they've accomplished their goal in this fight before the fight is like even started. And everything that happens now is just a bonus. So if they're able to kill Seb here, great. It's just gold in Yatoro's pocket. And then here comes Collapse with a huge RP. And this is, again, it's just delaying the game. Even though they're just killing supports with these cooldowns, Sumail's not in a position to walk up high grounds, right? And Seb is forced to buy back. It's just, the game isn't flowing OG's way. And even though, like, nothing really, this isn't even good, right, for Spirit. But the big thing here is that Sumail can't run up and hit. He's too low to actually get anything out of these kills. So even though Yatoro dies and Collapse dies, because Sumail has no resources, this high ground's not getting pressured. Toronto Tokyo has already been pushing out the waves. There's no creep waves in their base. There's just not, OG's not in a position to utilize their timing. So even though there's a 5,000 gold lead here, it does not really matter. And I think this is what Spirit are so good at doing in a lot of their games. And as this game progresses, eventually, even though OG are going to be able to secure another Aegis, I believe, by the time that he gets it, Team Spirit now have all the tools necessary to defend their high ground. There's the Horn Toss into Skewer. The Faceless Void now deals enough damage to fight into the Tiny. Even though there's a 6k gold deficit, he has enough items to where he can fight. And the Ember Spirit has the tools to destroy OG's backline. So overall, they've managed to delay the game to a point where they're able to fight back. And they didn't get snowballed over in the first half, where it was the most crucial that they don't lose the game. We talked about in the draft the threat of the Horn Toss and Magnus as an answer together with Wyvern to the Tiny. And we're going to see exactly why that is here. Magnus blinks in, Horn Toss is in the Tiny, and now look at how far out of position he is compared to his teammates. None of his teammates are really there to help him. And they don't really want to be all the way in here either. You have even the tier 4 towers are fighting for you now. And even though there's an Aegis on this Tiny, you notice how easily he's killed because his teammates just can't fight that deep. It's very difficult for them to play that far into their enemy base. And now there's still an RP, there's still a Chrono to come out, and it's just a very difficult place for Sumail to be in. And I think here, understanding that, you know, despite everything that OG has done well in this game, not being able to hit their timing, crucially, to utilize this Tiny to go high ground, just puts Team Spirit at like a position in the game where like they don't feel pressured at all. At this point on, they know, like, if they couldn't win with this Aegis, there's no way they're winning with the next one, unless we make some crucial mistakes. So from here on out, it's pretty safe, easy gameplay. The decision making becomes pretty easy. You can run together, you can play very safe, you can have your Ember just shove out your waves, and from here on to the victory, it's just pretty smooth sailing for Team Spirit.